Hi, as George said, I'm Jen Hartley. This is my husband, John, and we are going to speak today. We're in the process of the 12 steps of transformation, and we're going to be, can I have that? Thanks. Do I need to do something? I feel like it's echoey. Okay. The play button.
Or there.
Okay. This is some of my family. This is me, John, and our daughter Elena. We have a wonderful 9, almost 10-year-old daughter Elena, and we have a new baby, Evan. He's almost 5 months. And when Matt asked us to give this talk, he probably had no idea just how great we were for it, because it's on making amends, and we have done so many terrible, dastardly mistakes in our lives that we've had to make amends for. Our lives could read like, our mistakes could read like an episode of, like a list of Friends episode titles. This is a reference from the 90s. I know some of you were born then, but one where we had no money and one of us purchased an expensive gym membership on credit. The one where the nail polish remover was spilled across the new dining room table. New to us. Nicest thing we've ever owned. The one where Jen thought John was dead in Afghanistan. The one where Jen thought John was dead in New Hampshire. The one where Jen thought John was her dad. And the one where Jen realized she had no useful communication skills whatsoever. So it goes on and on. Today we'll be discussing steps 8 and 9, which is making amends to those that we've hurt. I'm going to just stand further away from this.
I just put up a couple more pictures here just because I had the power to do so. One of the other things that we are is foster parents. So this last week we had this little girl, Kiki, with us. If you're a praying person, you can pray right now for Kiki, who is in the foster system, and we want to see the most beautiful things possible for her as we journey. So one of the first things for me to do is to recap kind of where we have been, what we've been doing in this series, 12 Steps to Transformation. And a premise of this series, there we go, is that we all need transformation. That's really bad. We all need freedom. Some of this is specific to our own stories, right? The stuff we've experienced in our own lives. Some of it is general to our families, or general to our communities, our cultures, our subcultures. There's stuff in us that needs to be changed. And likely, those of us in this room together have some things in common in that, right? Things that are unique to our own selves, things that are common to these types of bodies and the world that we live in. And walking through these steps, it's about a lot, right? One of the things I think it's about is, sorry about the font size there, it's about finding strength in places that we've traditionally experienced as weak. Okay? Transformation. It's about finding joy in places that have largely been characterized in our experience by grief, sadness, depression, transformation. It's about finding hope in places that mostly have felt dark, full of despair. Transformation is about finding courage in areas that have historically been characterized by fear in our experience. It's about finding integrity in places tainted by our own manipulations in our efforts to get the things that we want. Now, all of these things and others perhaps that are more obviously related to your story also involve new experiences of freedom. The sociologist speaks here, the attainment of new levels of personal agency. Ironically, though, that attainment of freedom is not primarily about the assertion of our own influence. As Matt, George, and Josh have discussed in these past weeks, there is certainly a creativity involved in its attainment. There's a will that is all about overcoming obstacles, a voice that makes itself heard, a power that breaks chains and penetrates the most corrupt of this world's systems. But these steps to transformation aren't about being able to say that things are okay. They're not about figuring it out. They're not about getting our stuff together. They're about journeying, I think, out of a past and into a place where history's rules come undone, a place where insecurity is dismantled from within, not denied, not hidden, a place where weakness is dissolved as a channel for the perfection of divine power that's already at work in ourselves, penetrates and breaks through the thin armor of our best coping mechanisms and even our own self-deceptions. We find ourselves changed and changing. We find the world around us changing because our need for healing, our need for transformation, our need for freedom was never of our making alone. We surely have our hands in it, but there were many other hands, some visible, some illusory, some invisible. But it's always been more than just us.
I wanted to ask if anybody needs these booklets. We have them here, and if you need one, you could raise your hand and someone could bring one to you. They're the devotional booklets that we have for going through this series of Lent. Okay. All right, so one thing that we do know is that our sin and brokenness affects those around us. When we make ourselves open to the process of transformation, we realize how the brokenness that we're asking God to change has affected and continues to affect other people. I heard one time this quote, that what may in other people appear to us as a glaring character defect, when present in ourselves, appears to us as a rather charming quirk. And I have in the past been known to have an unseemly habit, or two. Naturally, these most often affect those closest to me. If you're married, if you're like me, and it affects other people, if you're married, this will be your spouse and your family. If you live with others, this will be your housemates and your family. And if you live alone, this will be your coworkers, your friends, and your family. I have been known to have a habit that greatly annoys my roommate. When cooking, I would peel vegetables over the sink and leave the peelings in the sink. Carrots, sweet potatoes, mangoes, what have you. Over the years, this grew to really annoy my husband. He asked me a number of times to disavow this habit, and there were a number of ways that I responded. Defensiveness. Well, I was just about to. Blame shifting. You're so critical. Minimizing. They're just carrot peels. Calm down. Issue rearranging. There's probably like a more psychologically correct term for this. Deflecting. My husband changed it. Thank you. We're a team. Issue rearranging, AKA deflecting. I always pick up your socks without complaining. Self-justifying. I'm so tired, I work so hard. Manipulative. Can't I do anything right? And punitive. If you can't be appreciative, I will not cook dinner anymore. So these are my natural responses, which are, of course, according to my sinful nature. I would rather be right than be humble. I would rather be self-righteous than bother to change. Graciously, God showed me the sin in my actions, or as it were, my non-actions. I was convicted by the Holy Spirit of sloth, laziness, irresponsibility, and considering myself better than others by assuming that others should serve me by picking up after me. Once I was able to admit this to my long-suffering husband and sincerely apologize, he graciously accepted my apology. But there was something else that I had to now do. Pick up my freaking potato peels from now on without complaining, and ideally without feeling self-righteous. Without feeling like I was doing everybody else a favor, when in reality, what I was doing was refraining from sinning against them. Romans 12:18 is a great guiding verse. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. So it actually is possible for me, and as far as it depends on me, I have control over that. I'm able to scoop up my carrot and my potato peelings, and thus make it easier to live at peace with people otherwise adversely affected by not only my messy carrot peels, but by my sin.
I just love that story. So the question kind of is put before us this week in the steps that we're doing. Step 8, the first half of it, we made a list of all persons we had harmed. And I think that it's safe in our experience to kind of substitute. If harm seems like too strong of a word, if that seems like something that'll empower you to not take this seriously, then substitute something else in. Offended. Significantly bothered. Sinned against. Hurt. People that you have affected, not infected, affected with your sin. Not just your specific sins, but the subtle patterns of sin that color and shape your values. The subtle patterns of sin that color and shape your attitudes. And, to some degree, affect your behavior. Sadly, it's often those who are closest to us who experience this side of ourselves most obviously, right? They bear the brunt. Our family, our loved ones, our closest friends. In many ways, they are the ones closest to us because for one reason or another, I often wonder why, they've persevered through that muck of brokenness that I tend to create around me. That's why they're my close friends. That's why they're still around. That's why I trust them. So, some of those are their family. Their family, so they just kind of have to put up with it, right, by nature. I mean, my brother, I'm pretty sure that if he could find a way to not be putting up with my junk anymore, he would just stop, right? But he's my brother, so I get to see him whenever I go to my parents' house, and occasionally we actually talk outside of being in my parents' living room. Others, they're attached to us in some way. They're close to us because they're attached to us in some way, and the benefits of that nearness, that closeness, outweigh the costs of the stuff that we also bring with us, right? Others, they stay close, they're comfortable being close because they've suffered now or in the past from similar patterns of sin. So what really might be brokenness in our lives just seems normal to them. So they don't mind being with us and near us amidst those things. Some people persevere with our junk just because they have instrumental reasons for doing so. Right? There's some reason they want to be close even though we have a character problem. One of the things is, though, is that it's like this. Beneficial balances of cost and benefit shouldn't be confused for an absence of impact of our brokenness. Right? When I think of my wife, the fact that the benefits of being in our marriage, apparently up till now, are worth the costs, that doesn't mean that there aren't real costs. Doesn't mean that my sinfulness is absent in its influence on her world. Similarly, for people who like hanging around with me and are close to me because we have some of the same problems, the fact that we share the same problems and that they might be blind to some of them doesn't mean that my problems aren't affecting them. Does that make sense? We might actually be reinforcing one another's problems. So that shouldn't be confused with absence of the influence of my sin either. And if a person puts up with all my garbage for their own reasons, well, they're probably also talking about that garbage behind my back. They're probably trying to put that garbage to work for their own purposes, if that's the way that they do things. People, I'm sure there's many, many other options, right? Point being, we should be thankful for the people who love us. Thankful for the people who maintain nearness and commitment to us despite the inherent costs of being involved in our lives. I say inherent costs because even if you, like me, are a high ego person who really thinks those costs must not be that significant, that's the way I generally view the world, I shouldn't take that love for granted. I shouldn't take that nearness for granted, lest I become the instrumental one, lest I become the one who in passivity lets their presence and nearness serve me without taking responsibility for the other dynamics going on. So where are you perhaps right now, or perhaps better, into what place is God calling you? Where is he drawing you into? Some of us are very aware of very specific patterns in our lives that cause us heart and headache, that bring pain to those who are close to us. And God might be calling us to intentionally, thoroughly engage those patterns, to peel off this particular layer of that particular onion in our lives. If that might be you, some recommendations. Find a couple people to journey with you. Do not imagine yourself alone on this. And with those people, don't just think about the people you need to apologize to or make amends with. Go through all 12 of these steps, please. You will grow. You will find freedom. And the people who are walking with you will experience similar things. Seek support and wisdom from others in the ECV community. Okay? Beyond that person, the one or two people that are close to you. If you're in a home group, somebody in the home group you get along with, your home group leaders. On Sunday, when we do prayer and we go over and you have an opportunity to receive prayer, seek that support. There's a pastoral care team here that would love to join you in the work that God's doing in bringing freedom to something that you know needs it. Now, part of this will be sitting down with God, and there's this word in Persian, it's ham safaron, those who journey with us, right? It'll be sitting down with God and your ham safaron, and being honest in listing down the people affected by this particular expression of your brokenness. Okay? So, for me, one of the various places where I have brokenness, there's many. I really would be fine if Jen just sat down and just told stories all night. So if you want to hear more stories, feel free to approach her. But so for me, like one of the places of brokenness that I deal with, right, is that I have this personality that likes to keep all of my options open until like I'm forced to actually make a decision, right? And what that means is there's people in my life, my wife, for example, who's like wanting to see a decision made, and I'm thinking, didn't we kind of make a decision? That decision was to narrow the 100 options down to 10. To actually thoroughly review what might actually be the outcomes if we chose option C. I thought we made that decision. Right? I remember Jen used to laugh at me because she'd say, like, John, are you planning on, kind of fill in the blank. Johnny, are you planning on doing the laundry this afternoon? Yeah, I'm planning on doing the laundry this afternoon. Sure, of course I'm planning on it. Johnny, are you planning on calling your mom? She called you yesterday. Yeah, I'm planning on calling my mom. And then I remember sometime in our first year or two of marriage, she said, Johnny, I figured out something that's been so frustrating to me for all this time. I said, what's that? And she said, when you say that you're planning on doing something, that means it's an object of serious consideration for you. It doesn't mean you have a checklist that you've actually like written down and you're like, it's going to get to that time when you're going to call your mom or do the laundry or whatever the case may be. Who are the other people who've been affected by that pattern in my life? It's not just my wife, my daughter, colleagues in my department, people with whom I'm in leadership here at this church. Okay? So if that's something that God is challenging me to deal with intently, it shouldn't take much work for me to sit down and go, who are the people that are being affected by this? Who are the people that this pattern in my life is influencing? And let me go now through a rigorous process of figuring out what it would mean to make amends to those people. Does that make sense? So some of you, God's calling you into some sort of a serious endeavor. Others of you at different places, you don't know what the heck I'm talking about. Transformation, making amends. Well, I get why other people need to do that. You might be in denial. You might be blind. I have many times been blind because of my pride when it comes to these kinds of things. It might be just too painful for you to actually think about. So if that's you, ask somebody you know and you kind of trust, but most of all, who will be honest with you. And my guess is that the perspective of a few others could shed some light on the influence of your brokenness on those around you. And if the people who you talk to can't love you while also being real with you, then call them out on that fact. Find people who can. This is one of the places where Jesus excels all others. Others of you basically get it. All right, but you've been following Jesus for a while. You've done this kind of thing before. It doesn't seem like the time to so urgently figure out who you need to make amends with. Or you're just too scared to imagine what actually starting to do that might do with your schedule in the midst of whatever other important things you have going on. All those things apply to me. So what does it mean to build into your practices of confession actual thinking about how other human beings have been affected? It's surprising to me how rarely when I think about confessing my sin before God, it's bedtime, I don't confess my sin. I think about me and God and my sin. I don't really think about the other human beings who've been affected by this stuff. But once in a while it happens. So there was a friend of mine named Dave who I used to work with, who I helped play a practical joke on. It was hilarious. Right? He was embarrassed. He couldn't show his face like in our workplace for a couple of days without blushing. I thought it was awesome. Everybody in the office thought it was awesome. But he ended up being a little more hurt and embarrassed than I really ever recognized or intended. And years later, when I was dealing with having hurt and embarrassed somebody else, God brought Dave to my mind. And I ended up writing a letter to Dave, putting it in the mail, a step of apology. Where does God have you? Whether you're in a place of going, I know this is an area where sin is affecting me and affecting people around me, I've got to chase this down. Whether you're in denial, or whether you're trying to figure out how to build practices of considering other people in your repentance and your confession, a simple step to do is to think of one or two people to journey with you in that. And to make a decision right now to have that conversation. Maybe it's a housemate. Maybe it's somebody sitting in the stall. What do you call these stalls? These in the stall with you right now. But my sense is that pretty much always there's somebody that's affected by my stuff. And sometimes I just need to acknowledge that and express thanks. That's all, sometimes it's just like, dude, thank you for being patient with me. There's not much more to do in terms of making amends right now. I'm just appreciative of the fact that you endure some of the things that are less beautiful about me. Thanks. Okay, so I am serious. If you don't know right now, I'm going to give a pause. I'm going to ask you just to call to your mind who it is that you're actually going to have that conversation with, right? Who it is that you're going to say, hey, I need to think about this thing that we were talking about at church, and I want you to just have that person in mind right now. And so if you know who that person is, I want you also to take a moment and just pause. Who are people that you know are affected by sin patterns in your life? You don't have to come up with a laundry list, right? Just one person, two people. And just be real with yourself. And what you might want to identify. This isn't like figure out what you're going to do, right? This isn't like I've got my plan for how to talk to them now. It's just they're people that are affected by you. So the second part of step 8 is that you don't really just need to have the names written down. You have to do what the people who I think marvelously developed this recognize is become willing to make amends. Okay? And what I really want to point out, and this is, most of what I'm going to say right now is honestly just lifted off of different 12 steps recommendation lists, right? So like the next 3 or 4 things I'm saying, it's like just common wisdom coming out of that community, right? Sometimes thinking about what it would actually be like to talk to the person doesn't help you to be willing, right? It's terrifying, right? It's like, oh crap, if I actually have to talk to them, then I'd have to da-da-da-da-da-da, and actually limits our ability to develop the willingness to really do what needs to be done. Does that make sense? So sometimes just going, okay, now there's this name on my list, John Hartley, I've got to talk to him about his sin. No, about my own stuff, whatever it is. Now just what does it mean for you to get to the point where you're willing to make amends? Because implicit in all of this step, right, step 8, and the next one actually, is the fact that we're kind of carrying something toxic with us from every one of these incidents. That toxin might be our own shame and guilt, right? So the fact that I know that I have hurt Jen in some way and I'm not dealing with it myself, right? One of the ways that comes through as a toxin in my own experience is the shame and the guilt that I'm kind of now having to manage somewhere in my emotional and spiritual life. Does that make sense? Sometimes it's a real influence that I'm having on Jen that's like a toxin that perseveres in my life. And what are we going to do with that? One of the things that becoming willing to make amends does is it prepares us to join God in what might be possible. In the remaking of that toxin in our own selves. The releasing of that poison from our own souls, right? That's what the becoming willing to do this does. I'm coming to a place where I'm able to let go of something that's really bad for me. And I'm starting to think about creating the possibility of healing for the other person. Me apologizing, me making amends doesn't guarantee anything in their lives. But I'm beginning to be able to imagine contributing to that. So one last story, and then I'll let Jen take over. Because one of these, there's this thing when you get to close to age 40. Some people do this much earlier than me. And at age 40, you're starting to have another baby, and you realize that because of the life choices you've made, you don't have this awesome retirement account set up. And you don't have like a big bank account, so you're thinking, well, some people would say I should get some life insurance right about now. Yeah, life insurance makes sense. For whatever reason, I don't know if it was because the idea of life insurance like confronted me with my own sense of mortality. I don't know if it was because like getting life insurance on some level, I felt like I wasn't trusting God. That'd be my spiritualizing way of dealing with this stuff. But I had a really hard time actually pulling the trigger to get life insurance, right? And that's something that was affecting my wife significantly because her anxiety was rising. Not because she thought I was about to die, right? Well, maybe she did. Like she said, there's a couple of the time Johnny almost died in place things on her list. But my sin was affecting my wife, right? And I wasn't dealing with it. I didn't start to deal with it until my wife dealt with me, right? Making amends, thinking about these people now, thinking about the way our sin's affecting things now, creates not just the possibility of healing for yourself and healing for them, but maybe you get to have a pleasant conversation with that person rather than the one that's less pleasant, where the defensiveness and all that stuff starts to kick in.
Okay. Do you have the finger?
Obviously, I have the finger.
Thanks. All right. Well, there's thoughts I have about the life insurance thing, but I'll leave them. All right. So, step 9, we made direct amends to such people, the people on our list, wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. So I would maybe argue that the hard work is done at this point, because if we have truly become willing to make amends to people, actually walking that out is going to be something that our hearts are restless for. And sometimes it's really obvious what that should be. In fact, as the church service was starting, I got a text message, and it said, it was from a friend who, a number of years ago, we had a guest, and this person that texted me had stolen money from our guest. A lot of money, actually. They were traveling, and so it was like more than you'd normally have on you. And recently, the person that texted me has been going through a process of restitution. So he texted me to say that he had contacted this other person who lives in a different country. I mean, this is sort of like, you know, it involves some effort on his part. It's not just super easy or a matter of just writing a check or whatever. Plus, it's kind of a lot of money, like I said. And he said, I just wanted to let you know that I've contacted the person and I have apologized and I've offered to pay her back. Which is great. And when it's really obvious, like I've stolen a certain amount of money, you need to pay it back, like maybe with interest. But how to go about doing it when it's for something that we've hurt someone emotionally or we've offended them, it requires a little thought and preparation from us. Some things to consider are, will it help the other person? Making amends certainly brings a freedom to us as the amend maker, but if our addressing the person would bring further harm, then it's probably not the right thing to do. If I've been internally critical of my sister's housekeeping, ironically, or my coworker's crummy work ethic, confessing that to them would be more likely to bring them harm than to actually help the situation. In this circumstance, confessing to a neutral third party or keeping it between God and myself while committing in my heart to stop judging them may be a better choice. And there may be further work required, like if you do work with a person and there's a problem. But at this point, it's not a matter of apologizing for something that's been only in my head so far. So that's one thing to consider. Will it help the other person? Will it hurt others? For example, if you want to make amends to an ex-boyfriend or an ex-girlfriend who is now married, there's now another person involved who may negatively be impacted by you contacting your ex. If your plan to make amends would threaten to hurt another person, then the plan should probably be reconsidered. And third, is now the time to make amends? If you're wondering about this, discerning within a safe community of close friends may help. You may decide that today is the day that you want to pick up the pen or write the email. You may determine that indirect amends are most beneficial. You may see the value of waiting until an opportunity presents itself. That may seem like the wisest thing to do. And you may realize that making amends needs to be deferred until a circumstance or a situation has changed in a certain way. So once we consider these questions, let's say you are now prepared to make amends. What happens next? Keith Miller says in A Hunger for Healing, when we make amends, we are simply telling the person we harmed the truth about our actions as we now see it, trusting that the healing, the self-acceptance, and the serenity we will gain is worth the rejection we may encounter. So telling the truth about our actions. First of all, what is it not? It is not explaining what the other person did to provoke us. It is not explaining the impossibly difficult circumstances that I was under that precipitated my wrongdoing. It is also not presuming the other person will forgive us immediately or at all. It is saying, I did X and it was wrong of me. It is repaying something that was taken. It is doing good. It is apologizing to others if we hurt or wronged someone publicly or in front of other people. This can be difficult. Once I was amidst a group of close friends and I spoke inappropriately to my husband. I know it's shocking to imagine. Later, one of my friends came to me and she said, Jen, I saw you say something back there that didn't seem like you. Is everything all right? The way she came to me so disarmed my defensiveness that I was able to right away agree that I had been wrong and that she had seen correctly, and that I realized that I needed to apologize to my husband for the way I had spoken to him. But I also needed to communicate to the group the people that had been there, because they had also been made to feel uncomfortable by my words and tone.
So I think that right now is when you want to talk more about that insurance.
Yeah, only if you want me to.
I guess, okay.
Okay, so this is the one about the life insurance. Okay, so my dear husband had communicated to me that he was ready to accept whatever consequence I deemed appropriate for his, failing to follow through on his word. I wanted to request something that
because I had failed to follow through on my word,
right? So that was the wrong thing.
I had done that.
I wanted to request something that would be a regular reminder to him so that it could be restorative. And also, I wanted it to be something that would reassure me of his care for me in the meantime, until he got life insurance. So I asked him to scoop the kitty litter every day until he obtained life insurance. And he did. And you might be surprised how long he scooped the kitty litter. I was off the hook for quite a while. Now I supervise, now it's my responsibility, because that was our arrangement when we got the kitties. So now I supervise, and Elena scoops the litter as part of her household contributions. You're up.
I asked her not to say how long it took. I know. I'm just thinking, I'm owning that, Sometimes our brokenness is embarrassing. You wouldn't think it would take more than 2 years? I think that's right. I think I did the kitty litter myself for 2 years until I finally got life insurance.
Now I do.
Becoming willing to make amends, right, for me, around this insurance thing, I don't know if I had thought ahead of time she might ask me to do the kitty litter every day until I do this. I don't know if I would have become willing, right? But because upon going through a process of recognizing my wrong, I knew that not only did I need to apologize and be forgiven, but I actually had to earn my wife's trust back, right? Because me not following through my word broke her trust. And while I was confident in her to forgive me, because my experience with her and her character and God in her life told me that's probably what's going to happen here, I had to own the fact that the next time that she was asking me to do something that she thought was really significant, but that I didn't value quite as much, would she actually trust me if I said yes? So doing the kitty litter wasn't just like some creative punishment or some creative reminder for me to get the insurance, right? It was me going through a process of owning what it would take to earn trust back. And one of the weird things about this, right, is that what we might normally feel like our rights maybe aren't our rights anymore. When we think about the circumstance of somebody having stolen money, right? What did I steal from Jen when I didn't do what I said I was going to do? What did I took something from her. I didn't just wrong her, right? I think it took me a long time. I still don't totally understand why in some Protestant circles it's, the Lord's Prayer, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. I think this might have something to do with it. I had actually taken something from Jen. And what that meant was that I might have to give something up, right? I might have to give something up that outside of this context, I would think I had a right to keep. It might seem like what she was asking of me was to give up something I had a right to. That's one of the things I think we have to wrestle with when it comes to making amends. I think it's more broadly something we need to think of when we think about kingdom orientations as opposed to social contract, etc. orientations. But we need to think of giving our rights away as a process of restoring others. We need to think about giving our rights away as just something that to be abandoned. Because sometimes holding to our sense of rights is the very thing that binds us and keeps us from being able to apologize to begin with. As we seek the posture, the place to make amends, as we seek the kind of freedom that God wants us to have, as we seek the healing that actually sees the poisonous things that our past has brought with us to exit our bodies and our experiences, as we want to find courage to do things that we don't normally have courage for, we're looking not to the establishment of what we can accomplish, but the releasing of our very abilities to accomplish that which matters most. Right? The giving up of things that we might receive better things. And I think about making amends. I think that that's got to be understood as part of it. We're giving up something in order to receive something much, much better. So I think Jen has a last story she wants to tell.
Yes, one quick epilogue. So this morning I was finishing up this talk, and I was working on my computer in the living room, and my 9-year-old daughter, Elena, came in, and she asked me to take her over to be an island, which we had already agreed that she would go over there. And it was the time that we had arranged. So I told her to let me finish what I was in the middle of, and then I would take her. She came back a little bit later, and she caught me working on something else. I apologized, and I immediately got up to take her over to the Evans. In the car, she was quiet for a moment, and then she spoke up, and she said, "Mommy, I felt sad when you promised me you'd take me when you were finished with what you were doing, and then you started doing something else." I agreed that what I had done was wrong, and I felt convicted, especially as we were getting ready to give this talk. So I asked Elena, "What can I do to make it up to you?" And she said, "I forgave you, Mommy. You don't need to do anything." But I pressed on. I said, "If I do this again, if I don't keep my word to you," because I lied to her. And I said, "If I don't keep my word to you, I'll do something to make it up to you." She paused, and then she said, "If you do it again, you have to scoop the kitty litter." For 2 years. That's what she said, for 2 years. So she didn't even know that was part of this talk, but I just thought it was funny. So.
So I want to give you guys a moment. Right? There's kind of 3 different possible actions that might be appropriate for you. I think that just for simplicity's sake, I'd say maybe there's just one that kind of meets you where you're at. Right? There's the "who are the people" type of action. Right? There's the "am I willing"? What does it take for my heart to become willing to make amends type of action? And then there's the "I've done this, I know who they are, I've made myself willing, I've got to pull the trigger. I've got to go do that, have that conversation" kind of action. Does that make sense? Right? And for each of us, one of those may be relevant. So as we transition toward communion, I just want to say a little prayer for us, and then in a moment the prayer of confession will be the next thing up. You got that right? And then we'll transition into communion. So, Father, thank you for the freedom from saying it was 2 years that I scooped the litter. Thanks, God, that you have freedom for us. Thanks, God, that you want to restore us and bring us to places of influence that are beyond just having a peaceful heart, but you want to make us like leaven that changes the world around us. You want to make us catalysts of restoration, of healing. So God, would you use this step to not only bring freedom to our souls, but to move us out as real agents of change? Because when we make amends for our stuff, it affects others. And that is agency in itself. So we just ask you for